It is 2 p.m. on the 8th of June 1967. The Middle East is embroiled in the Six-Day War, with Israeli forces facing off against the Arab armies of Nasser's United Arab Republic and his allies. In this dangerous environment, the spy ship USS Liberty was eavesdropping on all radio communications, proudly raising the US ensign. Being roughly 70 nautical miles off the northern Sinai coast, the crew of the USS Liberty detects surface radar contacts rapidly approaching their location. Without warning, two unmarked Delta-wing Dassault Mirage fighter jets fire upon the American vessel with unrelenting rocket and cannon fire, strafing any visible sailor on deck. After a few minutes, unmarked Mystère fighter jets continued the onslaught, this time using napalm. Amidst the air assault, the USS Liberty's crew was desperately radioing for help. However, their secret communication frequencies were being mysteriously jammed, thereby forcing the ship to become a sitting duck in the face of the incoming, unknown enemy fire. After a grueling 20 minutes, the jets withdraw, leaving a terrible scene of devastation. Faced with few options, and with 9 dead and several wounded, the captain ordered the raising of a third American flag for identification. Up until this time, US Navy men assumed that Egyptian forces were attacking them, and none of them were ready for the second shock to come. 24 minutes later, 3 motorboats appeared. Much to the horror and shock of US sailors, the boats, who were now launching torpedoes and machine gunning life rafts with armor-piercing rounds, were visibly adorned with the Star of David. These were Israeli torpedo boats. One torpedo struck the vessel's side, immediately claiming the lives of 25 American servicemen. This begs the question, why did Israel attack its greatest ally? And how true is the joint claim of the Israeli and US governments that the attack was a fatal mistake? This is the historiographer, and in this video, we will explore the covered-up history of the USS Liberty incident, one of the most horrifying friendly fire attacks in the 20th century. Before moving on, I predict that this video will be flagged, suppressed, and demonetized. But so be it. This is why I call on your support to share the video and watch it to the end. The USS Liberty was a cargo ship originally part of the mass-produced Victory cargo ship series built during the Second World War. Repurposed by the US Navy into an Auxiliary Technical Research Vessel, or AGTR, and given the distinct US Navy markings, GTR-5, it became an invaluable spy ship, even containing members of the CIA and the National Security Agency, or NSA. The state-of-the-art spy ship had equipment capable of detecting every possible frequency and radio transmission. Right before the start of the 6 Days War of 1967, GTR-5 received orders to head to the eastern Mediterranean from the western African port of Abidjan. Its task was a signals intelligence collection mission in international waters, close to the northern coast of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Nearing Sinai, and to avoid tensions with Soviet vessels in the area, the US Sixth Fleet sent a warning to all Navy ships to stay 100 miles clear from any coast. However, the USS Liberty didn't receive this warning. Instead, the vessel received assurances by the naval commander of the Sixth Fleet that there was no need to worry. Hence, the seafaring American spy station steamed on towards its intended location.
We were told there was no need to worry. We had asked Commander Sixth Fleet for an armed guard to go along with us, a destroyer. He sent the message back saying we were in international waters, flying the American ensign. There was no need for an armed escort.
The Liberty arrived at its intended destination on the early morning of June 8, 1967. It hence became the only ship in the area, and the closest Navy forces were 600 miles away to the west. Upon arrival, the vessel was circled overhead by multiple Israeli French-made Nord-Atlas reconnaissance aircraft. On the afternoon of the 8th of June 1967, the US crew, bathing in the terrific Mediterranean sun, felt very safe. In fact, they were even waved at by the Israeli crew on the Nord-Atlas reconnaissance airplanes. At one point, an Israeli Air Force recon aircraft circled the ship, made visual contact with the crew on board, and headed back towards the Sinai. Seaman Larry Weaver recalls the encounter. The plane had a big Star of David on it, and it was flying above our mast. I was able to wave to the co-pilot. He waved back and actually smiled at me. I could see him that well. They had seen the ship's markings and the American flag. They could damn near see my rank. Already flying one US ensign, the crew further raised a second, larger flag, clearly visible from miles on end.
We had an American flag flying the standard, and then we put up the holiday colors, which is a huge American flag. And it was a bright sunny day with the wind blowing. You could see it for miles.
What the crew didn't know is that two unmarked delta-wing single-engine Mirage 3 aircraft were scrambled at 1:47 p.m. to attack their vessel. In a violation of international law, the two Israeli Mirage fighter jets took off without any Air Force markings. According to an Israeli Haaretz newspaper article, right before the attack at 1:57 p.m., a recorded exchange took place between a pilot of the Mirage, who clearly saw the American flag on the ship, and his command HQ. The pilot said, "But sir, it's an American ship," to which command headquarters Chief Air Controller, Lieutenant Colonel Shmuel Kislev, ordered, "Nevermind, hit her." Immediately after the exchange at 2 p.m., the airplanes opened with all they had on GDR-5. The ship's hull began turning red as the plane strafed any visible sailor on deck. During the air assault, the USS Liberty's crew was desperately radioing for help. Yet, their secret communication frequencies were being mysteriously jammed, thereby forcing the ship to become a sitting duck in the face of the incoming unknown enemy fire. This is an audio recording of the Israeli Myster's pilot asking to use napalm. Minutes later at 2:03 p.m., unmarked Myster fighter jets continued the onslaught, using American-supplied napalm. Amidst the chaos, American Navy men were climbing the ship's mast to repair the last remaining radio cables. The crewmen were able to repair the radio, and the Liberty sent a distress message, which was received by the 6th Fleet aircraft carrier USS Saratoga. Given that the crew thought they were being attacked by Egypt, 8 aircraft armed with nuclear missiles were dispatched to attack Cairo. Thankfully, the aircraft were recalled and rearmed with conventional weapons. At 2:11 p.m., Israeli pilots were again instructed to confirm the ship's identity. According to the Israeli account, a ceasefire order was then given. All the jets withdrew at around 2:20 p.m., with a pilot ominously saying, "Let's leave something for the Navy." After the unmarked Israeli aircraft left, and with 9 dead and several wounded, the Captain William McGonigal ordered the raising of a third American flag for further identification. US Navy men assumed that Egyptian forces were attacking them, and none of them were ready for the second shock to come. 24 minutes later at 2:45 p.m., 3 motorboats appeared. Much to the horror and shock of US sailors, the boats, who were now launching torpedoes and machine gunning life rafts with armor-piercing rounds, were visibly adorned with the Star of David. These were the Israeli Navy's INS Peres, INS Tamas, and the INS Yashur. At this point, US Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara inexplicably halted the second aircraft sortie intended for the defense of the Liberty. One torpedo of the 5 launched struck the vessel's side, immediately claiming the lives of 25 American servicemen. The ship began listing 10 degrees, and crewmen were praying that the ship would not sink. According to the Israeli version of events, the torpedo boats withdrew at 3:15 p.m., and Israeli Commander Yitzhak Rabin sent 2 Aerospatiale 321 helicopters to apparently search for survivors. However, the sortie was probably to assess the damage done. At around 4 p.m., the American military attaché in Tel Aviv was summoned and told that there was a terrible mistake. Israel had targeted the USS Liberty. The attack caused a stir in Washington, with US President LBJ even acknowledging that Israel had attacked the ship in his meeting notes with top US officials, with American President Lyndon B. Johnson even stating that he would rather have the ship sunk than to embarrass his Israeli allies.
He said, I don't care if every sailor on that ship dies, I will not embarrass my ally Israel.
Meanwhile, Richard Kiefer, the only doctor on board the USS Liberty, was working tirelessly, trying to save the lives of all he could, all while being wounded himself. Only the next day on the 9th of June, and after 17 grueling hours, did help arrive. While LBJ was the most pro-Israeli president to date, the attack seemed too much for him to handle, and he leaked some information of the attack to the press. Worried about this sudden change of stance from their ally, Israel blackmailed LBJ with accusations of anti-Semitism. The US president was given an offer. In exchange for the US government covering up the story, the Israeli government 1. Agreed that LBJ would receive the full support of leading Jewish communities in the next re-election, and that Jewish leaders would stop criticizing him for the Vietnam War. 2. Offered to give the US government Soviet-made SAM missiles used by Egypt, the same SAM missiles supplied by the Soviets to the North Vietnamese. At around this time, the USS Liberty got back to Malta. Men were told not to give out interviews to the press or risk facing court-martial. The subsequent American inquiry was made in 20 days. No Israeli person involved was interviewed, napalm samples were discarded, the crew's eyewitness accounts were heavily censored, and for the first time in US history, the opposite side's story was entirely believed. Admiral Merlin Starling, the judge advocate of the US Navy, was only given 24 hours to review the final 600-page report. While he had reservations, he was ignored.
I read the Court of Inquiry and realized that my statements had been stricken from the record and never recorded. So I knew then for certain that the cover-up was massive.
The rapid inquiry hence exonerated the Israeli government. Ironically, the Israeli ambassador to the US sent a secret telegram to Israel. He argued that the Israeli government should admit its mistake and publicly apologize, but he was also ignored. The Israelis then made their own report, but no one was found guilty.
They didn't find anyone guilty of committing any crime or negligence or whatever.
Some US sailors received the Purple Heart Award, while the captain of the vessel, William McGonigal, was given the Medal of Honor. However, based on an Israeli recommendation to LBJ, the Medal of Honor was, for the first time in US history, not handed by the president. Instead, the medal was given by the Department of Defense in secret in a military base in Virginia. In the 1970s and 80s, settlements were made for the families of the lost by Israel. As for McNamara, he refused to comment on his actions concerning the USS Liberty.
I am not saying anything about the Liberty, period.
What then were the motives of the attack? This is a big question, and the motivations are still unclear. There are, however, three possible theories. The first theory states that the attack was to cover up Israeli war crimes in Sinai. The following extract is directly taken from the book Body of Secrets by James Bamford. By 9:50 a.m., the Egyptian town of Al Arish could be seen from the USS Liberty with the naked eye, like a solitary mast in a sea of sand. Although no one on the ship knew it at the time, the Liberty had suddenly trespassed into a nightmare. At that very moment, near the town's minaret, Israeli forces were engaged in a criminal slaughter. As the vessel sat within eyeshot of El Arish, eavesdropping on surrounding communications, Israeli soldiers turned the town into a slaughterhouse, systematically butchering their prisoners. An eyewitness recounted how, in the shadow of the Al Arish mosque, they lined up about 60 unarmed Egyptian prisoners, hands tied behind their backs, and then opened fire with machine guns, until the pale desert sand turned red. This and other war crimes in Syria were just some of the secrets Israel had sought to conceal since the start of the conflict. An essential element in the Israeli battle plan seemed to have been to hide much of the war behind a carefully constructed curtain of lies. Lies about the Egyptian threat, lies about who started the war, lies to the US president, lies to the UN Security Council, lies to the press, lies to the public. American naval historian Richard K. Smith said, "Any instrument which sought to penetrate this smokescreen, so carefully thrown around the normal fog of war, would have to be frustrated." Into this sea of deception and slaughter sailed the USS Liberty, an enormous spy factory loaded with the latest eavesdropping gear. The second broader and more dangerous theory is the one titled the Cyanide Plan. The LBJ library documents contain a secret document called the Cyanide Plan. This document was made up by a circle of pro-Israeli American advisors to the president, known as the 303 Committee. The plan was to sink the ship, blame it on Egyptian strongman Jamal Abdel Nasser, and invade Egypt to overthrow the popular president. Sources further claimed that there was a nearby American submarine picturing everything, though these submarine images were suspiciously lost to history. As such, these questions supporting this second theory arise. Why give the green light to the ship to get past the 100-mile line unsupported? And why did LBJ wish for the ship to sink? Why did McNamara recall the jets sent to rescue the Liberty? And why did the Navy take 17 hours to get to the site? This cyanide plan is supported by the captain of the Liberty, William McGonigal, who broke his silence after nearly 3 decades in 1997 by saying,
"Many years I had wanted to believe that the attack on the Liberty was pure error. It appears to me that it was not a pure case of mistaken identity. I think that it's about time that the State of Israel and the United States government provide the crew members of the Liberty and the rest of the American people the facts of what happened."
Further, in a buried BBC documentary from the 90s, Israeli intelligence officer Rafi Eitan refused to answer any question on the cyanide plan.
Why would you not be able to speak about Operation Cyanide?
I suggest we stop the interview here.
For those interested in this unknown operation, British investigative journalist Peter Hunam made an excellent book on Operation Cyanide. The third possible explanation was that the incident was a genuine mistake. This is what Intel officer Tim Ennis, survivor of the attack, has to say about this option.
If it was an accident, it was the best planned accident I've ever heard of.
The Israeli and US government's version of events claimed that the recon aircraft that circled the ship 9 hours previously did not report the ship to base. However, there were also 2 unidentified Delta Wing jets at about 9 a.m. according to a declassified NSA report. How could it be then that multiple aircraft mysteriously forgot to report the Liberty as an American ship to their command headquarters? Israeli commander of the torpedo boat squadron, Moshe Oren, stated that he was not informed to halt the attack. The Israelis, especially the gunboat crew, also claimed that there was no visible flag on deck and that they thought that they were attacking the Egyptian transport Al-Qusayr. This, however, contradicts the Israeli source of the shaken Mirage pilot who warned his HQ right before attacking. But sir, it is an American ship. The Egyptian ship Al-Qusayr was 3 times smaller than the Liberty, and it was nowhere to be seen. Further, one issue arose: who was jamming the frequencies?
Who would know the frequencies other than an ally? And who was the ally in the war? It wasn't Egypt.
Even if the Israelis had been blinded by the heat of the moment, why did the gunboats shoot the life rafts? According to the Geneva Conventions, shooting life rafts is a war crime. Before accusations of anti-Semitism spring up in the comments, this is a reminder that all sides in history deserve to be critically examined. One does not become Japophobic when discussing the Pearl Harbor attack, for example. The Israeli attack on the USS Liberty cost 34 American lives, while 172 others were wounded physically as much as psychologically. Abandoned and threatened by their own government, the sailors aboard the Liberty and their families are still pleading for a proper inquiry, and justice for the fallen.